What had happened previous under Lord Chelsea and the Mayor's family, who bankrupted the club, they sold Chelsea football ground to a property company in return for a lease at a rent. And in fact, they also sold the training ground, and then they used to rent the Imperial College training ground, which meant you had no privacy, no confidentiality, no control. And that was a state I invented. And anyway, people remember a company called Marlow Estates, and the Mears had a share, when they sold the ground to them, they got a share in the Marlow Estates. Then Marlow Estates, I got Marlow Estates into financial difficulties, arguing, fighting every point. They were taken over by Cadbury Estates, which was owned by a tough Irishman called John Duggan. And the fight carried on. Carried on. I used every delaying tactic possible to keep us going, fighting them. And finally Cadbury Estates went bust as well. And the money, Cadbury used the money to buy Chelsea from Royal Bank of Scotland. So the Royal Bank of Scotland now had, they left his money to, so they had a bad debt on their hands. So they very cleverly, a man called Bill Samuels, who was one of the greatest savers of Chelsea, he moved the money, he formed a company and moved the money into the company. So the bank no longer had impending bad debt, will form a company. The company owned the pitch and the fans would buy shares in the company. I thought, yeah, but they can be taken over. So I came up with a complicated system. So I formed the Chelsea CPO, we've got a CPO from now, called a CPO, and when we did the company's constitution, it said nobody associated with Chelsea Football Club could have anything to do with CPO. And nobody with CPO had anything to do with Chelsea Football Club. So CPO was for the fans, the supporters. And no matter how many shares you bought in CPO, you only had one vote. And if you wanted to change any of the rules, you had to get a 76% majority, not 51%. And that's how it went. I can say I'm a bit disappointed that the fans haven't taken up as many shares as they should do or should have done, because they say they love the club. Well, a couple of £100 isn't too much, is it, to own the club and save the ground? Because in the lease that CPO granted to Chelsea Football Club, CPO owns the name Chelsea Football Club, and they also own the centre spot in the pitch. But one of the conditions of the lease is that the club can only use the name Chelsea Football Club if they play at Stamford Bridge. So if they move to Battersea Power, Wembley or White Hart Lane, they have to call themselves Tottenham United or Wembley Wankers or whatever, not Chelsea Football Club. Of course, it started. And it worked, because Roman Abramovich tried to take it over twice and failed. All his money, all his professional advisors. So CPO is invincible for the Chelsea fans. So I'll tell them now, if you haven't bought a share yet, buy one or more. Make sure Stamford Bridge is owned forever by the fans. And because people will all be after it, because it's such a valuable piece of land. Yeah. It can't be as valuable as it is to generations of Chelsea fans. Somebody said to me years, not so long ago, he said, what's the first, he was coming into football as a chairman, he said, what's the first thing you have to be a successful chairman? I said, unpopular. He said, why? I said, well, when you come in, why you got into the club? It's because it's in trouble under it. Why is it in trouble? Because it hasn't been run properly. So you make changes. If you make changes, you're unpopular. I mean, give you an example. When I took over Chelsea, we had 700 complimentary tickets every bloody week, every home game, and yet we were losing money hand over fist. So I made 700 enemies the first week. But that's an example. You have to make change.
If you could do it all again, Ken, would you?
Yeah, I would, but not with Matthew Harding.
Do you want to talk about that, or not really?
Well, I just told the girls about it. I'll only say one story. First of all, I mean, the press loved him because I corrected, when the press wrote something was wrong, I corrected them in my infamous programme notes when they didn't like it. Obviously, so Matthew came along, jolly old they flocked to him, and obviously gave him all positive stories. But all the stuff about millions, what he did, he was a very clever man on what he did, which was insurance, reinsurance broking. And there's a long story there, but I'm not going to tell it today. But because his company had lots of money always at a certain bank, he could go to them and borrow some of it personally. So he went to the bank and borrowed 5 million and lent it to us, and we paid the interest. I mean, kiddie hoddle, everything was interest free, but that's another story. Let me tell her, he didn't put a penny of his own money in the club. What he did put in, he borrowed and lent to us, and we paid interest on it. And I'll tell you one other little story about that. Matthew got very friendly with Hoddle. Very, very friendly. And Matthew's crazy about buying Matthew Letizier from Southampton. On and on and on. And he was winding Hoddle up. So finally I called a board meeting. So we all sat around that, and he says, Hoddle came. Hoddle sat there, I sat here, Matthew was there, the other directors sat around. Okay, Matthew, you keep on about let's talk about buying him. I said, what's the transfer fee? 10 million? Yeah, okay, 10 million. Right, okay. What are we going to pay him wages? Been Monaco a bit. Million? Okay, million. Right. £1 million. So £1 million a year, his salary, plus his NHI, plus his signing on fee, plus it. Finally I said, then there's a transfer fee, 10 million, plus the interest on that. Hoddle said, what interest? Hoddle said, what do you mean? Well, I said, well, when you buy a player for £10 million and you borrow the cash, as Matthew lends us, we pay the interest on it. So 8%, that's 800,000 a year. And Matthew said, and Hoddle said, I didn't know he paid any interest. Dead silence. I looked across at Matthew, and I averted my eyes. I said, there's no such thing as a free lunch. So I pissed myself laughing, because he had gone Hoddle. 2 days later, England, Graham Kelly rang me up, asked me had permission to speak to Hoddle for the England job. Yes, of course, Graham. I said, can I ask you a question? He said, what's that? I said, well, because in those days, there was probably still is, a law that said, if you illegally approached a player coming under contract, then that was illegal, and you'd be fined and punished and blah. FA law. I said, well, Graham, who do I report the FA to for breach of their own rules? I I know you've been speaking to him for 3 months. Dead silence. I just pissed myself laughing and put the phone down on him. And I think at 4 o'clock, Hodder rang me over the phone to resign. I said, okay, don't worry, Glenn, I've been waiting for it. We lost 2-1. And Hodder, bloody hopeless. He was unfit, doing too much on his commercial things. So I gave Viola his job. And he sat down, apparently sat them all down in the dressing room, glass of champagne, and said, forget the past, this is the start, this is the first day of tomorrow. Let's go out and win, lads. He was that kind of a man. He was a gentleman. And they went out and we won 3-1. I can't remember the year, but I know the winner came from the right, cross from the right wing, so we banged it in and 3-1, win the final. And he was like that. He was a great gentleman, never raised his voice, and quiet. In fact, his Sunday morning routine, he came up to the penthouse, the weather was okay, we sat on the terrace, eating smoked salmon sandwiches, drinking a bottle of champagne. We were friends.
Of course, Gianfranco Zola, the little magician. What's that story you was telling me about Gianfranco and his wife?
We were playing Wimbledon, I think it was, a Highbury semi-final of the FA Cup, and we beat them. And Gwyn Williams came up to me and said, Chairman, got a problem. I said, what's that? He said, well, somebody buggered up the coach arrangements. We haven't got anything for the players' wives. Can you help us? Oh, God, bring them in. Because we had a, usual 35, 40 seater luxury coach. And soon I was sitting, there used to be first, as you came in the door of those coaches, there used to be a table there for 4, chair there, seats for 4, 2 front, 2 back, 2 facing, 2 backing, with a table in between. So these 2 ladies came in and sat down. And I was told, I'd never met them before, I was told she was Mrs. Zola. So Suzanne and I sat there in awkward silence, but didn't know how to break it. So I could take a step backwards. In Italy, in Europe, particularly Italy, they were much more serious about training and coaching. And before a match, they go into a training camp. You weren't allowed out the training camp, the players. No one was allowed in, including wives, girlfriend, nobody. Very strict. No booze, early nights, the lot. So, and of course we just got to the final. So I do what I said. So I said, oh, I knew her name was Franca. I said, you're Franca, Mrs. Zola, aren't you? And Susanna said, she had black eyelashes went, whoop. And she screwed her. She said, yes. I said, I didn't know how to break it. I said, you do realise that there must be no close physical contact between now and we're about Wembley. Dead silence. So I thought, Susanna was telling me, she was like, oh my God, what did he say that for? And finally she said, and it is the same for the Presidente. Dead silent, we all fell about laughing.
There's a very famous story. There's many stories with Ken and I. We ended up liking each other incredibly well. But he wanted me to sign a new contract my second season. And long and short of it, I had to go into his room and give him my demands. And I said, they're not demands. They're actually my wishes. And I gave him a bit of paper, A4 bit of paper, no agent, right? Things have changed a wee bit, I think, since then. And it was like, I think I was on 180 quid a week as player of the year, and I wanted 500 quid a week and I wanted a signing on fee, and I wanted 5 flights, return flights back to Glasgow, and an increase I forgot in the Scotland squad. And he picked up the piece of paper after looking at it, didn't even say hello, and threw it in the bin, and walked out his office. Didn't even say hello. And I'm sitting there, 19, 20 years of age, thinking, well, that didn't go very well. What he made the big mistake of not doing was realising I come from Glasgow, and even though I might have some sort of education, I speak with the odd polysyllabic word, I'm also from East End of Glasgow, and I'm also from Easterhouse, and I did what anyone else would do in that situation. I rifled through his drawers in his office, and I got all the contracts, and I did a mean, median and mode average of them all. And I came in the next day and he said, have you thought any more about that? And I went, yeah, I want a 10 or more than I was asking for. And he was just about to go mad. He goes, nobody's on that. And I went, nah, nobody is, but that's the average. And he goes, you can't know the average. And I said, yeah, I can. He goes, how can you know? And I said, because I rifled through your drawers last night and got all the contracts, mate. He just looked at me. I thought he was going to try and hit me. And then he went, brilliant. That's fantastic. Well done. It's yours. And kind of from that moment on, Ken and I had this, well, I mean, politically in lots of other ways, with nothing in common whatsoever. But in actual fact, humour and lightheartedness and jousting intellectually, yeah, we got on well. And we met up with him 2 years ago. We had a reunion down at the bridge for that team, that 83-84 team. And wildly Ken came along, 92, sharp as anything. And I was doing the MC that night. It's a real sadness that I kind of tried to get the club to film that night because, you know, it'll never happen again. And it turned out to be a brilliant, brilliant night. But we got in great. And for all the negatives, and there'd be negatives about Ken. And if you had got on the wrong side of him, it wasn't a good place to be. And also I'd wanted to stay at Chelsea and I had to leave because he wanted the money for me. I was disappointed with that, but in reality, he saved the club. He absolutely saved the club, and anyone who did that to the club I love, well, I'm on their team.
They had their ups and downs in those days, and I think he'd had a season ticket for life. Really, the family had. I think they had a couple of season tickets. Yes, they had more than 2, I think. And he said, I've just had enough. I can't take it anymore. At the end of the season, he said, that's it. I'm not renewing my season ticket. And he told the club, no, not having it. And of course, even in those days, even though they weren't doing well, there was still a waiting list for season tickets. There wasn't that many season tickets. So obviously his season ticket was allocated. Come August, at the start of the season, he goes, oh, I want to go back and watch it. Where's my season ticket? The club said, sorry, Ken, you know, we've sold it. You can't have it. So Linda said to me, oh, there must be something you can do. Give Ken Bates a call. So I rang Ken, told him the story. He sympathised. He said, yeah, I can understand. It wasn't a very good season last season. And, you know, more optimism for the new season. All right. Tell you what I'll do. I'll give him 2 season tickets in the director's box. I said, blimey, Ken, that's very generous of you. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. You know, you're a good mate you are, you know. That's solved my problem. So I told them they got 2 season tickets in the director's box. Great. Week later, in the post, arrived the 2 season tickets and a whopping great big invoice.
Great story.
Yeah, and then of course they turn up for their season in the director's box, and they couldn't believe it, you know, because there's another story that Ken tells about how when he took over the club, there were 78 people who were freeloading in the director's boardroom, having this lavish Ritz-style 5-course meal, champagne, different courses of exotic wines, and he got rid of a lot of them. He said, day one, I made 78 enemies. So, of course, you never got very much for your boardroom season ticket. They said, half-time, there was a biscuit and a cup of tea.
Brilliant.
Nothing beforehand, nothing afterwards. Cup of tea and a biscuit at half-time for their boardroom season ticket. It cost a fortune.